Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Today is Monday, January 4th, 2010. If everybody could please rise and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance. Of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All righty. In order to make this meeting official and establish a quorum, I'd ask Clerk Aaron Vanderwall to call the roll, please.
Gutenkopf. Here. Pezza.
Here.
Shea.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Bram.
Here.
Hipskin.
Here.
York.
Here.
Nybo.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Morley.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
14 present, 0 absent.
14 present, 0 absent. We have an official quorum. Number 2 on our agenda is a receipt of written communications and petitions from the public. If anyone has any written communications or petitions from the public, if you'd please approach the dais and present those to our clerk at this time. Any written communications or petitions from the public, please stand if you could now and approach the council and present those to our clerk. All righty. Seeing none, we now go on to item number 3 on our agenda, which is our public forum. And that is a time where anybody can speak about any Elmhurst matter. I'd ask if you, when I do call upon you, raise your hand to please state your name. You can go to either microphone to my right or to my left, name and address, and then we'll give you 3 minutes to talk about what you have to talk about. Anybody at this time would like to speak for public forum? Anybody? The woman there to my right there in the red.
Happy New Year, everybody. My name is Terry Pastica. I'm the director and a lawyer with the Citizen Advocacy Center here in Elmhurst. We're at 182 North York Road. My comments tonight are related to your agenda item, the Elmhurst Economic Development Commission. And there's a couple of issues that I'd like the council to consider and have some discussion on. According to the Elmhurst Municipal Code, the EEDC's purpose is to promote new and continued economic growth. Its primary duty is to maintain and promote communication with the city, government agencies, businesses, and trade industry organizations. And its members are required to be experienced professionals in these various issues related to sales, finance, marketing, etc. Considering the important function the EEDC has in promoting Elmhurst economic interest and growth, its liaison purpose between the city and potential business districts, and the membership of the qualified professionals on the commission, there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk with the City Council tonight and hope that we can get some discussion on. The first is whether or not there are any economic disclosure requirements for members to sit on the EEDC. And if not, I'd like the Council to consider making that a mandatory requirement. There's certainly precedent for this. I know out at DuPage County, members of advisory government committees are required to fill out economic interest statements, and I think that might not be a bad idea, not just for this commission, but perhaps for the additional commissions here in Elmhurst. The second issue is related to an issue that's been before the Finance Committee, the increased contract disclosure requirements. And I see Marilyn's here tonight, and I know the city has done some research on this, our organization has done some research on it, and I haven't seen the issue pop up again for substantive discussion in the Finance Committee. So if it's possible to tell us where that issue is, I'd appreciate it. And then the last thing related to the EEDC is, again, taking a look at what are the requirements once individuals are on the commission. Considering the purpose of the commission is to be a liaison into the community and to bring business in the community, I would like to hear the council's consideration of prohibition of those who sit on not just the EEDC's commission, but all commissions, of engaging in contracts with the city. I think it's something that's worthy of discussion as it serves two functions. Number one, it protects the independence of the commissions, not just the EEDC, but all of them, in terms of making sure that the advice that's provided to the city is independent. And number two, it shields the city from appearances of impropriety. And so I think it's worth it for the council to consider these two things. It, of course, increases government transparency and accountability, which I know you're all interested in. I look forward to hearing discussion on these proposed matters. I emailed this to Mr. Hipskin, who's chair of the Finance Committee beforehand, to give them a heads up that I was going to do it because I make these comments because I think it's worthy. And like I said, on the contract disclosure issue, our organization has done some research on this, and what we found mirrored what Maryland's research found, and so I'm interested to see how that issue develops. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pastica. We don't typically discuss public forum at the actual meeting itself, but we will look into this for you, and we definitely appreciate your comments. Anybody else for public forum at this time? Mr. DeMichael?
I am Paul DeMichael. I live at 17W275 Rodick Lane, which is in unincorporated Addison Township. I am currently the secretary for Bensonville Fire Protection District 1. I've come here this evening to bring you the good news. We have placed on the February 2nd ballot a referendum to increase our tax levy to 0.40, which is in compliance with what the city of Elmhurst requested. The question, although it is awkwardly worded, has been reviewed by Fire Chief Mike Kopp, and he agrees that it is in compliance with what state statutes require for this type of ordinance. The question will appear on both the Democrat and Republican ballots on February 2nd. We have basically put ourselves in good standing with the city. We have paid the current fee for fire protection on November 30th. We are in good standing with you. We have held up our end of the bargain. Putting this question on the ballot was no small feat. We absorbed all of the expense of placing it there. We cannot predict what will happen on February 2nd. By law, the fire district is prohibited from taking a position on either side of this issue. We're looking that there probably will be several groups which will take positions pro and con. Again, we've held up our end of the bargain. We now wait to see what the city will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeMichael, and we'll hopefully wait to see what the voters do, and hopefully we get this passed. It would make it fair and equitable for our citizens and the citizens of the unincorporated sections affected by this. Anybody else for public forum? Anybody? The gentleman there with his hand up with the cream shirt.
Dan Vandermolen, 156 Glendale. According to the 2008 Citizen Survey, the number one thing Elmhurst citizens like least about Elmhurst are the taxes. The biggest concern given for the next 5 years are the cost of living and taxes. Last year, the Historical Museum had a budget of around $1 million. To put this in perspective, the fire department has a $8.3 million budget. The police department has a $14.75 million budget. Both of these are essential services that operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The museum is open 24 hours a week. Last year, the city collected about $7 million in property taxes. The museum's budget is equal to 1 in every $7 collected in property taxes. The museum budgeted $575,000 in wages, $179,000 in benefits. To get an idea of the pay scale at the museum, consider the positions currently not filled. $82,620 for the education position, $82,620 for the community program director, $78,950 for the development director. Everyone in Elmhurst has been asked to pitch in to make up for the city's budget deficit. Last year, our sales tax was increased. This year, our property tax is being increased. Why not ask those that use the museum to pitch in and pay 50% of its operating costs in admission fees or donations? Use the Elmhurst Symphony as an example. They get limited funds from the city. They receive additional funds from donations. Then those that attend pay a subscription fee. Under this structure, the Symphony isn't closing its doors, but is seeing record rates of attendance. Mayor, I'm here to ask you to set aside your passion for the Historical Museum. Instead, use your skills as a businessman. In your business, what you pay your employees has to have some relationship to what customers are willing to pay for the services you provide. The wages offered by the museum in no way reflect what could be covered by a reasonable admission price. Requiring the museum to fund half its costs through an admission fee would force the museum to have the financial discipline that it is missing. The City Council is here to represent the people of Elmhurst. If you truly wish to represent the citizens, I ask that before you approve one dime to be spent on a design for a new $7.5 million Heritage Center, that you allow the people of Elmhurst to vote on their vision. A new Heritage Center will not only impact the city's capital budget, but it will also impact the general budget. Please allow the citizens of Elmhurst to voice their vision through a referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we do not have any plans to build a new museum, and those 3 positions are not filled because we are dealing with budget issues. So the dollars you mentioned, we don't have those positions filled. So as you mentioned, I think that's a good point. So anybody else for public forum at this time? Anybody else? All right. Seeing none, I will close the public forum at this time, and I will go on to item number 4, which is the consent agenda. At this time, if there is anyone that has any questions on any particular item, may have a question or may want to vote no on any particular item on the consent agenda, if you could please let me know which item you might want to pull at this time, that would be great. Alderman Shea?
Yeah, I would like E as in Edward.
Okay. Item E is an Edward. And anybody else? Any other items? Okay. Hearing none, I will ask for a motion and a second to approve the contents of the consent agenda, less item Z. Alderman Wagner motions, Alderman Pezza seconds. And I would ask Clerk Vanderwall to call the roll, please.
Wagner.
Aye.
Pezza.
Aye.
Gudenkauf.
Aye.
Shea.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Bram.
Aye.
Hipskin.
Aye.
York.
Aye.
Nybo.
Aye.
Healy.
Aye.
Morley.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
14 ayes, 0 nays.
14 ayes, 0 nays. The consent agenda passes with exception to item number E, item letter E. And now I ask for a motion. Actually, if Clerk Vanderwall could read the reappointment, please, for item E.
With your advice and consent, I will reappoint Mr. Dan Hiffman and Mr. Kurt Warnke to the Elmhurst Economic Development Commission, EEDC, for terms to expire on April 30th, 2012.
And at this time, could I ask for a motion and a second to put this on the floor, please? Motion, Alderman Pezza, seconds by Alderman Rose, and discussion. Alderman Shea?
Okay. Well, I pulled it for 2 reasons. One, I had this concern when we were discussing the DevCom project, and then what Terry in the audience had mentioned too, a little bit discussion, and we can have a little discussion on this. When we were discussing this before, Mr. Hiffman was on the EEDC, and I guess he wasn't on for a few months. I have a question about that because it says that the term expires in April of 2012. So was he off of it for a while?
I would defer to our city manager on if Mr. Hiffman was on or off the commission. I assumed he was on the commission, but there.
Excuse me. My recollection is that the term that Mr. Hiffman held and Mr. Warnke held have expired, and those positions need to be reappointed or new individuals identified to appoint them. It's been our practice, as we understand it, that any appointed official serves even though the term is expired until they are replaced. So his current status is term expired but still on, and that he hasn't been replaced.
Okay. Well, my main concern is, just like she mentioned, the appearance of impropriety. The money has been made on this project, in this public-private project, money has been made by the sale of purchase of the Athar, the Thorn, and the Hurley project, the Hurley building where the parking garage is going to go. And I just feel that this appointment should be postponed until those projects are finished because of the dollar amounts that are going to be incurred. So I think what I would like to do is, I would just like to make a motion to remove Mr. Hiffman and just leave on Mr. Warnke from the reappointment.
Alderman Brown?
Seconding.
Second the motion? Okay. So we have a motion and a second to remove Mr. Hiffman from the reappointment of the Elmhurst Economic Development Commission. And do we have discussion on that at all?
Yeah, to Alderman Shea, you said money has been made. Can you elaborate on that and tell me what money has been made and where, and what the dates are,
Well,
and how much the money is?
for the sale of the Hurley building, there was commission on that. And then there's to be commission on the Athar project building and also on the Thorn. So there's commission. And the commission, that's a dollar amount, so he's, making money on the project. So I think that would keep him, we should keep him away from that and postpone this until that's over. And then it would look proper.
Okay, just
I'm not saying keeping him off. He can always, reapply when the project's done. It's going to go for a while.
yeah. One thing I wanted a point of clarification is the majority of the people that are on the EDC are commercial realtors. And they do a lot of business in this town. So it's not only Dan Hiffman, there's a variety of other commercial realtors that do business in this town. That's fully disclosed that they do business in this town. We want them to be on those commissions because they bring business to this community, and a lot of them engage in their own activity as well. So it's nothing that's done behind closed doors or as a secret. This is something that is a good thing. So, but just so everybody's clear on that, there's no issues in my opinion. And Mr. Hiffman has been very upfront with his transactions and his being on the commission. He's been very upfront with that as well too. So just so everybody doesn't feel uncomfortable with this at all. And he is on the commission as it is, so if we don't reappoint him, technically, he would still be on the commission. So just so you understand that. Alderman Pezza?
Thank you. I guess I'm not even sure that it's a matter of how much money somebody made or that they made money. What I got out of the question posed, and I think it's a good question, no matter who it is, if it's John Doe or Susie Smith, I think the idea, and as you said, we have nothing to hide. It should be transparent. Nothing appears to be hidden. And I agree with that. And I just think that, for me, the burning question would then be, do commissioners currently have to fill out the economic statement of interest? I know that is true with the county because I myself sat on a board for the county, and I had to fill one of those out all the time to report any commissions or profits or anything. Does the city of Elmhurst currently have that? If not, it probably isn't a bad idea because, as you said, we don't have anything to hide. So I can't imagine that wouldn't be something to look at and hopefully adopt. And the other part is I believe I read someplace that both of these appointments expired in April of this year. So have they actually been serving since April, or was there a lapse when their term expired and now they're reapplying to be, how does that work?
Yeah, if their term was up in April and I haven't replaced them, they still continue to serve.
So it just kind of goes.
Exactly. And with a lot of these commissions, we've had a lot of commissions where we've had people on for a long period of time, and I've been, in some cases, not renewing people, but letting them serve until we maybe find somebody that is a better fit, that is young and wants to give their time, et cetera. So, and being a new mayor, there's been a lot of commission appointments to put into place, as you can see, as we've all been approving these throughout the year. So, no intention with this one. I think Dan's done a great job. and he's brought a lot of business to this community. He was an Elmhurst resident, so not only a businessman, he's a resident, and he's actually putting some of his own time and effort in personally, which I think is a great thing as well too. So, and again, a lot of our commercial realtors engage in activity in our community, and that's a good thing. That's something we want to see happen. So, and I don't think Mr. Hiffman has tried to avoid anything. Alderman Pez again?
Just to follow up then.
Sure.
So perhaps Mr. Borchert could answer that. Do we currently require anyone that sits on any of our commissions to fill out such a form or disclosure?
City Manager Borchert?
There's not a, excuse me again, unique to the City of Elmhurst form, but Elmhurst is very well aware of the DuPage County requirements, and all of the commissioners that serve in Elmhurst must follow that economic interest form at the county. Those forms, once filed, are available for the City of Elmhurst to review should there be an interest. It's been my observation of Elmhurst practice that commissioners, when serving, if are involved in any situation where there would be a real conflict or an appearance of a conflict, disclose that and recuse themselves from such involvement as appropriate.
Yeah. And the Elmhurst Economic Development Commission isn't like the DP, the zoning commission, where they're actually voting on variances, things like that. So Mr. Hiffman would not be in a position to vote on his own property with variances, et cetera. But it's more of a recruitment, a business recruitment and economic development, exactly what it is, commission. So there's really not a whole lot of voting that goes on in that commission. It's more networking and where are we going with the community? How can we bring businesses in? We need sales tax. We need we need to bring revenue in. So what are the holes that we have to fill, et cetera. So anybody else for discussion on this? Alderman Brown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regards to this issue, I also had some concerns because, in this case, Mr. Hiffman is involved in a major project here in the city of Elmhurst. One of the things that I would have liked to have seen that we've done in the past, which was typical process, was to actually have a resume from the applicants for appointment, because therefore we can review what is their background, what do they bring to the commission. Maybe the commission may or may not have changed, and therefore they may not be appropriate anymore if they're up for a reappointment. So I would like to see that practice continue moving forward. The other thing is, I think Terry Pestica from CAC has brought some items to light that we as a council, at least I will in the near future be making the recommendation that we will look into further. And that is in regards to disclosure. Not saying that we are doing anything incorrect by appointing, in this case, Mr. Hiffman, but perception sometimes becomes reality in the grand scheme of things, and I rather make sure that we are providing all the information out to the public as possible, so there is no perception that there is any wrongdoing, especially in a case like this.
And City Manager Borchert, according to what you mentioned, we do actually have them, according to the county, fill out disclosures. So basically, we're doing it already, and I think that's kind of the frustration that we have up here is
It's the county form.
the county form is filled out, correct? So the economic disclosure form from the county is filled out by the commissioners. So I think it's already been addressed, in other words. So, Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to point out there's some council members who are new this term, that there is before the Finance Committee a proposed disclosure ordinance. It's been there for about a year and a half now, I think, and the Finance Committee has begun discussing a local disclosure ordinance for the city of Elmhurst. We've had some model ordinances from other communities. It hasn't come up recently on our agenda, and so I'm hoping that it comes up sooner rather than later. But we have begun this process of discussing what the city would do to require economic disclosure from individuals who do business with the city that would be different from the county's disclosure rules.
Okay. Alderman York?
Yeah, since the point that I began serving on the council, I've been attending all the Economic Development Commission meetings. And actually, I think, I don't want this to be on the record, but I think Dan was at the first meeting I've seen him since I was elected this last month. He's just had a lot of things going on. But I will tell you that we're going to be getting a report from the Economic Development Commission that I think everybody's going to really find very interesting and enlightening. And the work that these individuals do on a monthly basis, and as well as meetings aside from that meeting, like in committees and things like that, to draft this report, I think will be very enlightening to everybody. And I think you'll see that there's a very macro look of the economic development in Elmhurst, not by person X focusing in on, development of a parking garage, but looking at the overall scheme of things, like looking at the north side of town and using the collective interests of all these people to really benefit Elmhurst. So I'd ask us to really just sit back and take a look at this report that's coming up. But I've been at every meeting, and there's, like you had mentioned, there's no real voting or no decision-making going on there, but just a lot of really good thoughts and cool things going on there.
Great. Thanks, Alderman. Alderman Rose.
I just would like to review, not all commissions are exactly the same. Some commissions, as the mayor alluded to, really have statutory authority. Zoning commission can make decisions, actually, that are not, most of their decisions, or many of them, are reviewed by the council, but there are sometimes when they act as the zoning board of appeals or particular things where they have the ability to make a decision that is not reviewed at all by the city council. The Fire and Police Commission has statutory authority to actually spend money. Some of the pension money, they are clearly involved in that. I think that makes some sense. The Elmhurst Economic Development Corporation, I just would like to review, as Alderman York is saying, primarily their purpose is to evaluate and to really advise us on what we need to do to really nurture a business, a productive business environment. One of the things I'd like to disclose is Dan Hiffman is my neighbor. Dan Hiffman is a proud resident of the 3rd Ward, and I'd like to say that it's very rare on many of these commissions that anyone from the 3rd Ward is represented. And I would take great umbrage at the idea of someone from the 3rd Ward who has done a good job, that we want to kick the person off of the 3rd Ward, the north side of town. And that would be, I got to tell you, that is really problematic to me. I disclose that he's my neighbor. He is a good resident of this town. He has no statutory authority on the EEDC. Therefore, I want to agree with what Alderman Bram says. Sometimes perception becomes reality, but I'm afraid I'd like to look at it the other way. We may be painting, I think, a guy who's done a great job for us and somehow saying that, we're not sure what he's going to do. I think the broader issue of disclosure makes some sense, but I got to tell you, I am very opposed to taking Dan Hiffman's name off here. For many reasons. I think it's unfair to him, and I think it's unfair to the people from the north part of town and from the 3rd Ward, who are rarely represented. And so I am absolutely opposed to taking Mr. Hiffman's name off.
All right. Alderman Nabel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with a lot of what Alderman Rose just said. Well, like many of you up here, I know Mr. Hiffman pretty well, and I suspect that Mr. Hiffman would be quite disappointed to know that his willingness to serve our community has caused such angst and difficulty and trouble for some of us here on the dais. I also know Mr. Hiffman would probably prefer us not to proceed in voting on his appointment to this commission without his credentials being in front of us. I mean, it's almost not fair to him to not have the opportunity to present those credentials and show his expertise and his significant involvement and experience in this area. That is a good point raised by Alderman Bram. And not only for us, I mean, even though some of us know who Mr. Hiffman is, but also for the public and the members of the press. The people should know who we are voting on here. So I think a more appropriate step at this point would be to defer to the next meeting the vote on both of these applicants so that we can, to use a lawyerly phrase, supplement the record. I mean, I think their application should be in front of us. And at that point, we'll have all their credentials in front of us and can make a more informed decision than the decision that is before us. Now, I don't think that motion's out of order if you're going to call me for out of order. I think if there's a second on that, I think that's a motion that takes priority over a more substantive motion. Am I correct, Mr. Attorney?
It is. You are correct.
Okay, so I would move to defer to our next regular meeting the vote on this matter. And Alderman Shea's, is that correct? I can defer Alderman Shea's motion until the next meeting?
You can defer the entire question.
The entire question, thank you. I would move to defer the entire question to our next meeting.
Oh, to do that, I'll withdraw my motion.
The seconder has to withdraw.
I have to withdraw or second it?
You didn't.
I just have to second.
Okay. Second. And then a motion to defer and a second is in order, takes precedence, and
So move.
Okay.
ends the discussion.
All right, we have a motion to defer by Alderman Nybo, seconded by Alderman Mulliner, to defer to our next meeting, the appointments of these two fine gentlemen.
Sounds good.
And we need a voice vote on that. It would be okay. All in favor to defer to our next meeting? All in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Alderman Rose, for the record. All righty. Those appointments will go to our next scheduled meeting. We'll have more information, resumes, et cetera, to look at these fine people that have served our community. Okay. Item number 5, reports and recommendations of appointed and elected officials. Updates from myself. I know we're going to be receiving a little information from City Manager Borcher here in a few minutes regarding our 2010 census and the city support for this. I, as a mayor and representing the council for the city of Elmhurst, overwhelmingly support the census. It's a huge benefit for not only us locally to receive federal and state funds, but it's a good way to get a pulse on what's going on here in Elmhurst. So I have actually signed a proclamation officially supporting this. I'll read just a little bit of this here. Whereas an accurate census count is vital to our community and residents' well-being by helping planners determine where to locate schools, daycare centers, roads, public transportation, hospitals, and other facilities, and it is used to make decisions concerning business growth and housing needs. Whereas more than $300 billion per year in federal and state funds is allocated to states and communities based on census data. And whereas census data ensure fair congressional representation by determining how many seats each state will have in the U.S. House of Representatives, as well as redistricting of state legislators, county and city councils, and for voting districts. Whereas the 2010 census creates jobs that stimulate economic growth and increase employment opportunities in our community. And finally, whereas the information collected by the census is protected by law and remains confidential for 72 years. And now therefore, I, Peter DeCiani, the mayor of the city of Elmhurst, proclaim this official census taking and committed to be a partner with the U.S. Census Bureau to help ensure a full and accurate count in 2010. So it's something we really need to make sure that we all comply with. It's a simple, and I'll refer to our clerk, Vanderwall, on this. I believe it's, how many questions, Aaron?
10 questions, and it should take about 10 minutes.
So 10 questions in 10 minutes to make sure we get our fair share of federal and state dollars. At this time, I plead with the constituents of Elmhurst. We need it more than anything. So please make sure you fill out that census form. And with that, is there anything from elected officials before I go on? Alderman Brown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the things that I would like to make a request or a recommendation, I believe, to all the committee chairs, is if the full city council, as well as the mayor, et cetera, could see a pending items list. It was brought up today of what is in committee, what's not in committee. I know I submitted something almost a year ago that still hasn't seen committee. So if we could see in the upcoming weeks an overall pending items list for each of the committees, so everybody does know what's on the docket in the next few months. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Brown. Anybody else? Any other reports or recommendations at this time from anybody? All right, hearing none, I turn it over to the big guy, City Manager Borcher, to talk about the census.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of reports to provide for the City Council and community, and for the Council to understand, neither of the report items require the city council to vote tonight on any matter. It's a matter of information sharing to supplement the information you may already have in other forms or documents, but provide some additional information. As Mayor DeCiani has introduced, he is supporting the U.S. Census Bureau and signed our proclamation of support. Understanding that City Clerk Vanderwall and Spencer and I have essentially formed our city committee to help organize other service providers in the Elmhurst community get the vote out. I'm not going to read the PowerPoint presentation. The City Council has a hard copy of the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint itself will be on the city website later this week for folks viewing that would wish to take more time to review the PowerPoint. It does provide some general information about the importance of that census for the nation and for the Elmhurst community. Supplementing this slide, as it says the census matters, as an example, last fiscal year, the revenues occurring to the city of Elmhurst as a result of capita count are in the area of the income tax, the local use tax, and motor fuel tax. Those dollars are distributed by the state of Illinois on the basis of population, Elmhurst getting its fair share of that income. Last year, that income was $131 per person. So for every person that's counted, the city of Elmhurst received last fiscal year $131. Because of the economy, which we've reported earlier, Elmhurst is not insulated from. Elmhurst is certainly a part of the broader economy, and Elmhurst is suffering as an entity the way we're all suffering. The state of Illinois is now reporting that the per capita distribution of those three sources of revenue, income tax, local use tax, and motor fuel tax, is distributed at $115 per person. So that impact of $16 times Elmhurst population of 43,298 is upwards of $700,000 reduced revenue because of the economy. What we don't want to have is a reduced income as a result of missing any of our citizens. So we will be aggressively implementing respond to the Census Bureau. We'll talk more about the reduced revenue on the second report relative to the capital budget. As Clerk Vanderwall reported, it's a simple census document this cycle. There's no long form, just a short form, much easier to complete and participate on. And a credit to the Elmhurst community. 10 years ago, the city of Elmhurst did what it could to get the vote out, partnered with the school district, the private schools, the church community, the institutions, certain other service providers, certainly the park district, to get information out. And in response to that, and Elmhurst has seen this in many other venues, the Elmhurst community responds. The Elmhurst response was the highest response in all of DuPage County. So Elmhurst, from a staff perspective, is very proud of its citizens, and we will do what we can do to redo that great Elmhurst response. Again, Elmhurst responded in the highest percentage of all of DuPage County, and we'll try to duplicate that in this next cycle. We will contact all of the service providers, asking them to notify the folks that they provide service to get the word out on the census and to encourage folks, again, to respond. Key dates are coming up here. The forms will be mailed to the community in March. Census Day is April 1st. Census takers will begin to respond to those addresses that haven't responded in April. And by law, the Census Bureau needs to deliver a population by December. So it's a huge undertaking that is moving forward. Again, you'll read more about the Elmhurst Initiative. It'll be in the next city newsletter. and you'll see it in many other venues. We've appreciated a fine working relationship with the newspapers that cover Elmhurst News, and we'll provide a press release for the newspapers to add to that information. If there's any questions on this item, we will do our best to answer those. There is a little more information on the U.S. Census Bureau website. If you'd like to seek out independently information, it's available there. Any questions?
Any questions, anybody on the, Alderman Pezza?
Yes, thank you. Just 3 quick questions. Is it correct that you said the amount we are allocated is based upon the population of Elmhurst or the response we receive?
Elmhurst, there are 3 sources of revenue where the population is used. That source of revenue is distributed on a per capita basis. Okay. So whatever Elmhurst population is, Elmhurst will get its per capita contribution accordingly. As a side note, I commented on, as a result of the revenue and the recession, the state of Illinois is collecting less income tax and less motor fuel tax, and as a result, they've got less to distribute to the tune of 10% or so less. So Elmhurst is receiving, not because of population, but because of less revenue being collected by the state, less money. So what I'm certainly interested in doing is making sure that Elmhurst gets all of its revenue by making sure it has as high a population count as we have.
And that's based on the response?
And that's based on the Census Bureau's findings,
so response.
which are first based on the independent responses to the questionnaire. Census takers will go out and knock on doors to get feedback from folks who don't respond, where the census folks believe there are people at. But
okay.
We need to do our best job of getting independent returns to the questionnaire.
Okay. And then second, when the money is distributed to the 3 funds, I believe the funds pretty much tell us where and how we're allowed to spend that money. Is that correct?
City Manager Borcher?
It's Elmhurst revenue, local government revenue. The City Council has earlier expressed a policy on how those dollars are used. There is a policy and a string attached with motor fuel tax. Motor fuel tax revenues have to be used in areas of maintaining and improving the city's roadway system. But income tax and use tax is revenue to the general fund, and the City Council is free to spend those dollars as it would wish. Okay.
And the final question is, do we know if there are still any job openings? Are they still looking for people to work on this?
I believe they are.
Great.
Okay. Very good. Those are good questions, because if we don't have 100% response, which we need to have so we can get all of our funding, we'll get a half a loaf or a short loaf, and we need a full loaf at this particular time. So this helps funding for, again, schools, for the city, for our police and fire departments. They look at it's a big picture here that we're trying to bring funding in for. So I encourage everyone, fill those censuses out, get them mailed back in, and I thank our city manager for doing this little PowerPoint. Before he starts on the 5-year capital, I just wanted to make a couple of minor little things that I wanted to mention. You know, 2 things that people have been pushing are trees and streets. Our streets need to be repaved. They need to repave, you know, we need to repave more of them. We got potholes. And we cut out tree planting a couple of years ago. You know, Mr. Borchard will be hopefully being able to maneuver some of the capital budget over the next 5 years, be able to try and get the tree planting and the streets back to where we need them to be. So with that, I'm going to let City Manager Borchard go into that. I'm sorry, Alderman Rose.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment to the public and to remind those of us here on the dais. Alderman Morley also brought this to my attention. One of the big consequences of this census maybe the redistricting of the ward maps in Elmhurst as a result of this. In Elmhurst, because we have these 7 wards, all of the wards have to remain fairly even by population. And I've sat through 2 redistrictings, so the boundaries of the 3rd ward have changed since I've been here 2 different times. People who were once in my ward are not in my ward. People who didn't used to be are now in the ward. So that it really is important, I think, for everyone to be counted, because it will have a very local impact. Who you think is your alderman may not be your alderman by the time this census gets done. So that's another reason I think that people should be really eager to go ahead and complete this, and we should all be aware of that there will be an impact probably in a year or 2 after the census in terms of those ward boundaries will probably be redrawn again.
Very good. Anybody else before we go back to City Manager Borcher for the 2010-2011 5-year capital expenditure budget? What do you have for us, sir?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I don't certainly understand the City Council's ability to read reports and documents, and you do a wonderful job of that homework on your own. I'm not going to read the PowerPoint. City Council has a copy of the PowerPoint. We're going to go through the PowerPoint for the audience and for the folks viewing on the cable programs. The PowerPoint will be available on the city website for those who would wish to go back and look at the detail that is provided with the PowerPoints. My purpose this evening is to go over a few points, explain generally the capital expenditure budget, very strategically, not get into the detail. The actual 5-year capital expenditure budget, the City Council has been provided earlier a hard copy of, and that whole hard copy is also available currently on the city website. Talk a little bit about the impact of the 5-year capital budget as it relates to the operating budget, and again do a overview of the 5-year capital. First of all, the capital expenditure budget is a part of the city's general fund. This City Council did go through a bond sale earlier in the fiscal year. You would recall the report of Standard & Poor's evaluating the city's financial status and condition and providing a rating, a Standard & Poor's rating of the city of Elmhurst prior to that bond sale. Standard & Poor's and Moody's understand and include the 5-year, or include the capital improvement fund as part of the general fund. The city of Elmhurst, as a self-imposed action in 1970, created a capital expenditure budget and a capital improvement fund to finance capital expenditure items. Somewhat self-imposed as a home rule community. If you look back at the financial rating agencies' evaluations, they give Elmhurst very high marks for having established that capital improvement fund and for establishing a 5-year capital expenditure budget. Elmhurst, because of that, segregates through our excellent finance staff and finance committee and then city council. That team separates capital and general expenditure items, which allows for good discipline and decision-making that provides a fine opportunity to provide service to the community and maintain the city's infrastructure. But the capital improvement fund is really a subset of the general fund. We prepare a 5-year capital budget. Those infrastructure items are so significant that it's important to look 5 years down the road. The operating budget is provided in 2-year bites. So we're currently wrapping up now and finishing the 5-year capital budget as we're rolling into the 2-year operating budget preparation. First 2 years of the 5-year capital become a part of your 2-year operating budget. Capital expenditure budget really includes expenditures across all of the various funds of the city. Utility fund, the parking fund, somebody mentioned the expenditures in the parking fund for parking decks. There's a number of funds in the city. From an operations perspective, to state again, the fund that the city has its greatest concern over currently is the general fund. In that regard, in a rather extraordinary fashion from a city budget officer perspective, the 5-year capital expenditure budget has been prepared for you, but using the capital improvement fund in a much more significant fashion relative to supporting the operating fund of the general fund. That said, I'll get into, again, some strategic overviews. But for the record, did want to provide, again, the general clarifications of how Elmhurst has identified a capital expenditure item, $25,000 or more. There are certain capital expenditures like equipment that would be in bites of less than $25,000. As an example, a police car. It's a capital expenditure. We provide a summary in the capital expenditure budget, and it's part of the vehicle inventory system. But by itself, it's not individually over $25,000. As an example, similar fashion, a tree is a capital expenditure item in that it's an investment in the future of great value to the community, but the one tree is certainly not $25,000. The capital expenditure budget itself is focused on the larger items, but there could be capital that's actually less than that in dollar amount. The staff attempts to provide classifications of the expenditures and priorities of those expenditures so that you as the City Council have that analysis done for you, certainly for your review and approval, but that rating or ranking, if you will, is done by the staff to help you go through that capital budget. You would all recall the process we've just gone through relative to the issues in the general fund relative to the budget and the updates you've been provided. We also had benefit of an advisory team that provided their report on the city's budget, specifically the revenue side, also reviewed the expenditure side. I think there's been some consensus. This is out of the task force report, the final pages of recommendations identifying from the task force perspective back in October, the general fund and its revenue shortfall, and then the task force's identification of a solution on the revenue side: property taxes, motor fuel tax, total tax increase, and then expense reduction. But difficult on the expense reduction because all of the areas of service are really still important to the community. The City Council did go through and approved last month a property tax increase of $3.995 million, pretty close to the advisory position of the task force. So that is in place. Still to be identified are expenditure reductions, which the staff will provide in its operating budget preparation, and perhaps what's yet to be considered, but at the Finance Committee, is the motor fuel tax adjustment. But a lot of the problem is resolved, but there's still a lot of the problem left to be resolved. Specifically, again, a very dynamic process. The budget preparation process you get monthly reports, staff prepares monthly reports for staff use and for council use. Things change. The budget was prepared based on estimates of expenditures and estimates of revenues. The revenue estimate, unfortunately, we've identified typically a conservative estimate. Typically in the past, revenues have exceeded, in reality, the estimate this fiscal year is breaking that standard. Unfortunately, the actual revenues for the first 6 months are woefully under the bleak initial estimates of revenue, which has required our staff appropriately to redo the revenue estimate. We provided this summary, I think, last month, and it illustrates that on an estimate side, on the revenue, we're now looking at a revenue of sales tax that is about $1 million less than the revenue that the task force was working on when it made this recommendation. So even though, again, a lot of very good work has been done by the City Council relative to enhancing revenues, some of our revenues are still underperforming, leaving us with some significant work yet to be done. So where are we at? Again, January 4th, we're reviewing the 5-year capital expenditure budget from a strategic perspective. There's no need to approve it yet. You actually approve only the first 2 years of that as you approve the operating budget, which is not till the end of April. I did delay the, you can see here on the changes of the calendar, the city staff was given a little bit more time to prepare their staff departmental operating budgets. It was delayed because there was still the unknown position of the revenue for the general fund. Understanding now what the City Council has approved, I've asked the staff to finish their operating budget presentations for the Budget Committee to begin to work on, and that's where staff is at now, beginning to work on the operating budget. But strategically, understanding the economy's impact on the revenues to the general fund, we're anticipating that there's going to be great pressure on the general fund, which is why staff is prepared, and I'll summarize some of the changes on the capital budget. What is in the capital expenditure budget is the significant capital for public works infrastructure, IT work, land acquisition, stormwater, tax increment financing fund, which supports the central business district, and the parking system. Over the 5 years, there's about $75 million in the 5-year capital budget. This is how it is suggested it be distributed. Revenue for the capital expenditure budget, the most significant amount of that comes from the capital improvement fund. You see that 25% is from the capital improvement fund. The utility fund provides the next largest chunk of revenue. Bond issues provide significant revenue. Again, the council's past practice, with the exception of this past cycle, has been that we identify a source of revenue to pay principal and interest of bond issues that would not be property taxes. We did make an exception to that relative to the general fund in this past tax levy cycle, but typically, and it would be a city staff desire going forward, that any bond issues would be identified for consideration with a funding source. You can see the single largest source of revenue to the capital expenditure budget is the capital improvement fund. I think Alderman Pez's question relative to impact of the census relative to distribution of revenues was in part thinking about the capital improvement fund. Capital Improvement Fund is financed by state income tax. 80% of the City of Elmhurst income tax receipts, those income tax receipts, again, are based on the state's income divided up by the population of the state, and every city gets its per capita fair share. State income tax then supports the Capital Improvement Fund. There's a 0.25% home rule sales tax that is allocated to the Capital Improvement Fund, and then lesser sources of revenue fill out the Capital Improvement Fund. This is what that Capital Improvement Fund revenue looks like. It is significant and allows for a lot of things to be done that's very positive for the city's infrastructure. But that reduced revenue is affecting the Capital Improvement Fund in a very significant fashion. This slide tries to illustrate and highlight for you the current projections of revenue for the 5 years, the estimated 09-10 and out 5 years. Last year, when the 5-year capital budget was prepared, the numbers were much larger because the revenues heretofore were much larger. We talk about the reduction in that revenue, and then we multiply that reduction out over the 5 years. You see the cumulative difference at the end of the 5 years is nearly $5 million. So the ability of the Capital Improvement Fund to support infrastructure and the capital expenditure budget is reduced by $5 million. So we've got a bit of a perfect storm where our operating budget is strapped and limited, and we're reducing expenditures where possible, but trying to find ways to defer, eliminate, but keep the substantive areas of our programs, keep the substantive areas of our projects alive and well as we get through this rock and a hard place with this difficult economy. Our major revenue source for the capital expenditure budget is down over the 5 years, almost $5 million. Identifying expenditures that the Capital Improvement Fund is proposing to help is identified here. Infrastructure work, building improvements, parking improvements, stormwater management, IT work, payment of bonds, the city share of the, which is 50% of the infrastructure around the hospital project, are all being helped through the capital expenditure budget with specific allocations of Capital Improvement Fund revenues. Again, all of the details are in the capital expenditure budget, which you've had distributed to you in hard copy. Try to illustrate here where the Capital Improvement Fund will specifically be helping on projects that are supported otherwise by the general fund. And highlighted here are changes that we've suggested to be made from what has been done in the past. As an example, street resurfacing at $875,000 projected to support the 10-11 street resurfacing budget. Capital Improvement Fund is proposed to pay for that, which relieves the general fund. Concrete street reconstruction, typically part of the operations fund. We're allocating $100,000 of help from the Capital Improvement Fund, which then relieves the general fund to do other things. Identified, I believe it's very important from a city perspective that we get back at maintaining our urban, suburban tree forest. Last year, there were no trees planted. It can be very difficult in the general fund to identify the ability for that program to be continued without help. I'm suggesting and recommending that the capital improvement fund provide for help for 1 year to reestablish the tree planting, tree replacement program, and to begin a program of removing the weakest ash trees in the community and replacing those ash trees, which is recommended by Morton Arboretum and others that are leading edge of urban forestry maintenance organizations to get ahead of the emerald ash tree borer problem. So in a strategic oversight perspective, then, we're recommending that the capital expenditure budget, with specific help from the capital improvement fund, help the city's general fund to the tune of this $750,000 that it in the past hasn't supported. To say it another way, the general fund financed these items without help from the capital improvement fund. We're recommending and pointing that out for your understanding. Ultimately, the City Council needs to approve such a recommendation, but we're proposing that the capital improvement fund help the general fund in this way. Specifically on the tree purchase, absent some direction from you all that you don't want to do this, direction will be provided to the Public Works Department to begin to inventory those trees and those tree locations that would be benefited from the program, so that that program could be put together beginning in January with bids going out in February, bids being received later in the spring, contracts awarded for the purchase of those trees, to allow that program to go into effect with payment coming out of the next fiscal year's May allocation. But this is a program that you can't start with a decision one day and begin the project the next day. There's a lot of front-end work identifying trees, types, sizes, and bids receiving, awarding, and securing that resource to do the program. To be clear, we would be, from a staff perspective, moving forward later in January to implement this program with this funding source from next year's operating budget, but again with help from the capital improvement fund. With more help going to the general fund from the capital improvement fund and less dollars flowing into the capital improvement fund, some things had to drop out of the capital improvement fund. These items are either removed from the 5-year capital that had been there in the past, in the out years, or have been in annually and are now deferred or removed until revenues could be returned to a point where they could again be reestablished. All of these projects, from my perspective, are worthy to be approved, worthy to be supported. But from a priority perspective, looking back at the way we prioritize, have prioritized projects in the past, these are projects that are being either cut for this 5-year capital or deferred, pushed back. This just is a summary then of what is in the capital improvement fund and how the 5 years roll out and support the capital expenditure budget and support the general fund. As you can see in the balancing pages here, the fund balance, we're proposing to further reduce the fund balance. This is capital dollars directed to appropriate capital projects. some pluses and minuses, but basically, at the end of the 5 years, not much money left. City Council will be annually reviewing this, annually making adjustments, and as revenues return, I would anticipate they would return, we'll be able to add things back in, but at the moment, this is what it looks like. Again, what's next is the stated before, the capital gets rolled into the operating budget. First 2 years of the capital are part of the 2 years of operating budget. We will begin scheduling with the mayor's support and the committee chairman's support, preliminary staff thoughts and recommendations relative to the operating budget so that you all will be getting within your area of a committee assignment some early indication of what is the staff's thoughts relative to how this operating budget is going to have to be presented. Finance Committee will be continuing its review of revenues. I know they've had a number of sessions on motor fuel tax and the state, property tax relative to a rebate program. It's an item of study. The Finance Committee looks at all of the revenues that support all of the city's funds on an annual basis. Budget team continues to review the operating budget, and we will prepare that final budget then for your presentation. You get that document the first week of March. That's the strategic overview of the 5-year capital expenditure budget I wanted to provide. Kind of the good news and the bad news. The good news is there's a lot of money in the 5-year capital. Bad news is there's less money than there has been in the past. A significant change from a staff perspective is, and that we'll be proposing to use the capital improvement fund as it supports the 5-year capital budget to allow this type of support to the general fund, understanding and anticipating that because of going back, this reduced revenue from this plan, which this plan requires, not that it was the council's plan, but the city council did approve nearly that property tax back at that time. We have not yet implemented the motor fuel tax. So that's $400,000 that's not yet identified. If it was identified, the bottom line shows that we're still identifying $2.2 million in expense reduction. That was without this bad information. It's good information, bad news, that revenue's down an additional $1 million. So we might be down now $3 million. We're identifying that with this help to the general fund, we're reducing that general fund operating deficit somewhat, and we'll continue to look at expense reductions on the operations side, and Finance Committee is still looking at other revenues. But we anticipate there'll be still a difficult cycle of operating budget expenditure controls that we'll need to go through. That's the essence of my report. We'll take any questions if there would be some at this time. Again, not anticipating that you'd be in any position to approve anything tonight. This is just the first cut of hitting the road with our feet moving after the holidays and the new year. And would not anticipate you've done much work on the previously distributed details of the 5-year CEB. But as you go through it, these would be the strategic items we'd ask you to focus on, think on, and consider. If you do have questions, we're here to try to answer it at this time.
Thank you, City Manager Borchert, and this was excellent. I'm going to open up this discussion. Before I do that, I just wanted to mention, you know, even though we got this levy increased, we still knew that we were going to be cutting over $2 million and now $3 million in order to make our budget work for this year. And that was the tough part, was being able to, you know, levy enough to get by and provide core and critical services, and now utilizing some of this capital money to lessen the blow of the cuts we're going to have to make. But still, these are, you know, we're going to have cuts. So we'll you know, we're already cross-training people downstairs. We've brought those counters down. We're you know, eliminating staff where we can. But again, the delivery of service is still key and core and critical, and we're gonna do the best we can to make all that happen. So we appreciate everybody stepping up. But it'll be a work in progress naturally. Alderman Gutenkopf, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I have 3 questions, and
Sure.
we'll take these one at a time. Page 5 of the 5-year capital expenditure budget that you gave us shows the revenues and expenditures and change in the fund balance, and it shows all of our debt service from the bonds, and our projections then looks like we're assuming we're not going to issue any GO bonds for the next 5 years, so that we can kind of get ahead of the game by the 2013-14 budget. And I just wanted to confirm that at this point we're not thinking we're going to be issuing any GO bonds in the next 5 years.
There is a GO bond issue highlighted in the transmittal letter. Things have changed with the, again, on the positive side, the bond issue that was sold this current fiscal year was mostly for the Larch Avenue parking garage and a little bit for the hospital's infrastructure, which the city is paying a part of. But with the not yet certain, haven't gotten the check from Metra, but the $2.5 million that Metra has budgeted and has identified and publicly stated is available for the city of Elmhurst for the Larch deck, that has allowed some flexibility in the revised capital expenditure budget. But there still is bond issue, 2 bond issues identified. First, for this coming fiscal year, mostly to finance the work at the wastewater treatment plant. Should we not be successful, our first pick would be to get a very low interest loan from the EPA. Absent that, there would be a need to borrow that money. That bond issue would be probably proposed to be 100% financed by utility fund revenues as opposed to general fund. The second bond issue, though, would be in the out years to support the Addison parking deck when that project is ready to proceed, which I think is somewhat aggressive, understanding the current economy, but that would be the plan. So the second bond issue is economy-driven to support the Central Business District improvements. There are 2 bond issues anticipated potentially.
And just to clarify, those are not reflected in this chart.
I think, which page are you on?
Oh, it's page 5 of the
What we handed out earlier?
budget earlier.
They're not reflected. Tom, it's right here. This page 5.
Right.
No, it's not.
Marilyn's trying to help me. What page should we look at to get those 2 bond issues, Mr. Trozine?
On the second one for the parking deck on page 5, the line item for parking system, it's the 3rd line item down. You'll see that there is a payment transfer to the parking system of $401,000. That would be the capital improvement fund contribution to help pay for that proposed project on Addison.
The second, the Addison deck.
Correct.
where's the bond accounted for? Is that the debt service on the bond, that 400,000?
That would just be the capital improvement fund contribution. The bond proceeds would actually be recorded in the parking system fund, and that's where the construction would occur also.
So I think maybe to help, if we were to look at that project, in the parking deck construction, page 75, look at the worksheet on page 75 of the CEB, it will identify, again, the project classification and the priority, providing a high classification, a priority B, meaning it's somewhat important, that there's positives that are associated with it, but it does identify funding source, $7.5 million general obligation bond issue, and Mr. Trozine went through that we would, from a staff perspective, attempt to identify how the bond issue, principal and interest, would be paid for, and in this case would be some help from the capital improvement fund.
On page 12 of the CAB, you can also see the summary document that City Manager Borcher was referring to. That page includes the anaerobic digester project, the very first item, and then down under parking system, you'll see the parking deck improvement of $7.5 million also.
Yeah, I think that thanks, Mr. Trozine. That illustrates a better use of some of the documents you prepared for us. So the capital expenditure budget, page 12, if you look at that, you've got the page number, top left, page 67, gives you more information on the anaerobic digester, but you can see at a glance the GO bond issue. And then further down, same information in the parking fund. Thank you. Does that clarify?
I think
Does that clarify your question, Alderman Gutenkauf?
Well, I'm still making sure I understand how all of this is accounted for. So the debt service on that bond, when it's issued next year, not in the upcoming fiscal year, the year from now, is not going to show up as debt service on the GO bond. It's going to be paid for from the parking deck fund.
That would be the staff recommendation.
Any other discussion?
I have two other questions not directly related to this.
Okay, go ahead.
Would you like me to go ahead?
Sure.
Okay. I have a question. This is page 44 on the capital expenditure budget. We discussed earlier new sidewalk this is a new sidewalk installation, and you mentioned in your overview postponing SSAs to fund construction of new sidewalks. Typically, this is a project where we're essentially fronting money to residents to put in new sidewalks, and then they pay us back through the SSA. We've established one in the fiscal year that we're in now on Gladys, and I'm wondering if that sidewalk installation is going to be postponed because of this recommendation.
The Gladys approved special service area project would not be postponed. This would be to suggest, from a priority perspective, I've said before, the core and the critical items, my understanding of what the City Council is desirous of is critical, maintain, core to the quality community, maintain. And in that regard, it was our reluctant position that new sidewalks, although they certainly embrace and support and allow a community to improve themselves, that the program that the city has had in the past of a 50% match to a private side raising of dollars is a very desirable and appropriate public expenditure, but because of this very difficult timeline, time period, it's not critical public safety, it's not core existing it's proposed to be deleted for at least the foreseeable 3 years. It reappears in the 4th and 5th year. But the current approved project would go on, would proceed.
So this is just recommending that moving forward, we postpone creating
Correct.
SSAs for sidewalks for another couple of years.
Correct.
Thank you.
Before I call on Alderman Rose, I know we have a couple applications in the hopper. Would those be postponed after this coming year, or are we going to be considering those for this year?
It would be the staff's recommendation that you would consider that other projects and programs needed to be done, and there wasn't room for a new project, at least at this time. So even though they have been initiating a review process, in that they haven't gotten to the closure, they haven't gotten to an approval point, staff would, with your approval, not tonight, but with your approval of the operating budget in April, would notify those in line that the line has stopped moving. We're gonna put projects on hold until revenues return, and then the line would begin to move again. Between now and then, understanding that we're reviewing a difficult budget, we will notify those in line that there's no approval going to be made until the city council finish its review of the next operating budget.
All righty. Alderman Rose.
That's an interesting thought. As we discuss this, can we before we get to the point of making decision, I'd like to make sure that we have an idea how much in real dollars this has actually cost the city. This is, let me be real clear, this is a north side issue. So I'm very jealously guarding something that is really going to improve the north side. It's real easy to throw that off, but let's find out exactly how much dollars we're talking about here. Before these people have worked very hard on this, those who have applications in, before we do that. So I guess I'm signaling, I'm not so sure I think that's a great idea.
No, I understand it, and it's why we wanted to get some of these more strategic thoughts out, not
Right.
seeking approval tonight, but begin your thought process. And
I understand that, but I think we need some facts before we move forward making a policy decision, and that would be, how much does this actually cost us? So that I can, in my thinking, weigh the relative merit between trees and sidewalks.
Well, in that regard, we can identify certainly those areas that have expressed interest for more information. We cannot estimate how much potentially it could cost, because we don't know what would be interested in being supported. But those that have expressed interest, we can put a preliminary cost estimate of what a 5-foot sidewalk down those stretches of roadway would cost. We can do that, certainly.
Exactly. Those follow-up.
Yes,
Those people have, this is as you know, this is a hot issue. These people have put a lot of effort into it, and some of them have not been able to do it for 2 years, and now they're at the starting gate again, and now for us to say, oh, halt. I just want us to be very cautious, and let's get some facts here and some figures before we say no to that.
Point well taken, Alderman, and I'm right with you. Being a former Northsider myself, I appreciate where you're coming from. So, and we'll always fend for that North Side, as you know. Alderman Hipskin?
And to back up Alderman Rose, you're right, this is a 5-year capital budget. They've been working on this for 2 years. I'm not from the 3rd Ward, I'm from the 4th Ward, but it is an important issue. And I think that as we understand really where you're coming from, it does make sense to have real numbers, and I think you'll find overwhelming support for the common sense which you're really bringing up right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Brown.
Yeah, I would like to just summarize and just say ditto to what Alderman Rose has just stated. It is primarily a north side issue. I'm really concerned. I even wrote myself a note on this one. A strong concern to delay something 2 years that took so long of a program to get off the ground. And a lot of people have worked very, very hard for it. And when we talk about safety, I honestly do think this is a big piece of safety. If I compare trees versus sidewalks, I hate to say it in the greater community of Elmhurst, but at least from a safety perspective, you're seeing the sidewalks be a bigger piece of that puzzle. So I know there's no decision to be made tonight, but I want to emphasize of getting those additional figures that Alderman Rose has requested, to really take a close look at this before we move forward with what is currently proposed for this item. Thanks.
Thanks, Alderman. Anybody else for discussion? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Yes, thank you. Page 48 addresses the York and Brush Hill intersection improvements, and the funding, not in the fiscal year we're discussing, but in 2011-2012, presupposes a federal grant of over $1 million. What happens if we don't get the grant?
Say this again, Alderman Gutenkopf.
The York and Brush Hill intersection improvements, these are related to the area around Elmhurst Memorial Hospital, providing reconfiguration of the access on Roosevelt Road and York Road. Some of the work around Elmhurst Memorial Hospital to create a better, safer interchange falls on the City of Elmhurst to provide. The total project is almost $2 million, and our intention is to pay for slightly over $1 million of this project with a federal grant. But my question is, what happens if we don't get the federal grant?
City Manager Borchardt, I'll let you handle that one. We're good at grants,
two major players involved. Absent the federal grant, it would be 50% the hospital and 50% the city would have to help answer that question. We've got, from the current evaluation system of those federal grants, this project is a high-ranking project that, depending on the other projects that are submitted for evaluation, we believe that the project is a high value and a high possibility of getting the federal grant. Absent the federal grant, whatever the expense is would need to be financed by the folks that are interested in that project. In this case, at least the city's got a partner, which is the hospital. Hospital and the city would need to determine whether or not that project should go forward without the federal grant or be reconfigured. We still need IDOT approval of the project in that they've got jurisdiction on that portion of the York Street corridor. So that's a question that is well identified as another of the many potential moving parts of a plan, of a budget. Revenues can change, expenditures can change, and plan for revenue sources can change. We're identifying a grant, seeking the grant aggressively, but until that grant is received, it's not received. Even the grant for the Larch Avenue deck, which is under construction, from a city staff perspective, there's still concern in that regard. Understanding we're dealing with another governmental entity, and that governmental entity has to make things work from their perspective. If they don't get the money, they can't give the money, and they're still working on they're getting the money. So we're pleased that Metro has identified that grant and Elmhurst it favorably, but it's still in question until it's received.
Thanks, City Manager. Anybody else? Alderman Pezza.
Thank you. Hope I'll phrase this correctly so you can understand it. Regarding the general fund assistance that would be coming from the capital for the $750,000, I know normally the distribution is 80-20, so I guess my question is, how would that $750,000 assistance, how would that affect the percentage then? What would the percentage be instead of the 80-20? Because obviously it will affect.
State income tax, this slide illustrates the estimated 09 revenue of state income tax at $2.6 million. So 10% would be $260,000. So if 10% is $260,000, $750,000 is 30%. So The 80-20 for then the proposed first year of the next 5-year capital would be more like 50-50.
Okay, thank you.
Again, the capital budget has been used as a rubber band to expand when needed to do other things and to contract when it doesn't need to, as a second fallback to the general fund balance. Past city councils have enjoyed a fund balance in the general fund, and that rubber band was provide core, critical, needed services, needed infrastructure, make it balance, make it work out, if need be, fall back on the fund balance to make the budget work. That fund balance option is completely gone and off the table. Now the only rubber band is the capital improvement fund, and it's with, you know, I have, as the manager said, don't mess with the 80-20 because it's very important for those dollars to go into the capital improvement fund and allow those dollars to support the capital expenditure budget. But when we get to this position, it's core critical first, desirable next, and our staff recommendation would be don't mess with the 80-20, keep the 80-20, but for this year, let's stretch the rubber band this way. It's our city staff proposal recommendation for you to consider.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you. I did have one more question.
Number 7. I'm just kidding. It's okay.
Page 20 is the remodeling of the police station firearms range, and I recognize this is something they've been trying to do for quite a while, and it's not a huge amount of money. It's $67,000. The range currently accommodates pistols but not rifles, and for rifle training, our police have to go to ranges outside of town. It would be convenient for them to be able to train here in town on this range. What I'd like to know is what we're currently spending to send officers out of town to train. I mean, they've got travel time away from Elmhurst. I imagine it, you know, it takes a while to get to the range in Lamont and get back. And I'd like to know what our projected savings are going to be by remodeling the range so that they can train here.
Insightful question. I don't have the specifics in front of me, but you can identify it's by staff suggested as a class 3 project that involves a replacement or renovation of a deteriorating facility, and the priority C, optional, but beneficial to the city because of productivity. I will Chief Neubauer is nodding. He's anxious to answer that. We'll get into the answers. He actually went through a bit of a grind from the city budget committee, which is the finance director, the assistant, and myself, now joined by acting assistant manager Kopp, to get this project in the 10-11 staff presentation for you. So from a staff perspective, we believe that the productivity improvements justify the expenditure, but it is optional.
Alderman Mulliner?
Just to follow up on that same one, if we put in if we improve this range, will we be able to have police officers from other departments come and use that, and will we be able to recoup any dollars from that? As you know, we use the training tower, I know, with other fire departments. Will we be able to do the same thing with the police?
I think the answer is yes, but we would be careful about it because we don't want to use it up too fast. But again, Chief Neubauer would have a more complete answer to that.
Very good. Anybody else? I want to mention too, we have been pretty successful in obtaining grants. You know, the Large Street deck was in process before I took office, and we lobbied Metra after the fact. We, through Senator Pankow and through Mr. Pagano over at Metra, were able to secure these dollars. Now, we haven't gotten the dollars yet, but the deck hasn't been built yet, but we've got an earmark in the budget for next year saying that we've got $2.5 million, again, after the fact. So I think with a $500 million level 2 hospital going up, it's a pretty good indication that we should be in a position to qualify for some federal and state dollars from IDOT and from the Fed. So hopefully that all works out, but we'll work together with our partner, with the hospital, and make it happen. Lastly, we just secured a grant at I believe at 83 and North Avenue, Chief, for the backups on the stoplights there. That was a request. We've had some people complaining that when power is out, we put stop signs up, and it's dangerous, to our officers to put 5 guys in the intersection, and it's probably one of the most busiest intersections in the state of Illinois. But with staff and help from local vendors, we actually secured, I believe it's almost fully funded grant to actually install battery backups at our North and 83 intersection, so that we don't have to put police officers out there. We will never have power go down once that backup is put in place, and that was through securing a grant. So I think our end is like 10 or 15 grand out of the 70 or 80,000 that we're looking at investing there. So we're constantly looking to do what we can with our resources, and we've got great staff that really follows through with that. So kudos to City Manager Borchert and the department heads for tracking down those dollars. So anybody else? Any other discussion? Alderman Brown.
Thank you. I have a few items as well. On page 52, IT, I noticed that the IT request, I believe, compared to last year's budget, went from, trying to get my numbers straight here, 455,000 budgeted last year, and now up to 790,000, which is pretty significant in the times that we're in. I do understand there's some efficiencies to be gained, but is there any additional information other than what's stated here on page 52 that could be explained by the almost 50% increase in that budget line item from one year to the next?
City Manager Borchert.
I'm not certain at this time. I think there was a significant deferral from last year. Marilyn?
And significant things you'll see in the projected 2011 year. Look at the 4th item down, the police MDTs. Those are scheduled for replacement, and I think we have put that off 1 or 2 years at least, so they are really in need of replacement. The first line replacement of our PCs, that we have put off 1 to 2 years. We will continue to put that off if we can, but it's a placeholder in there because you can only hold those off so long. The MDTs for sure we're going to have to replace. Those are 2 very large items that make up the bulk of, right there is $400,000.
In regards to that, I see that there's a line item, and thank you for pointing me to this page that does share a lot more details.
It's a little bit hidden.
The last line item, laptops, and I believe that's a quantity of 50 at 60,000. I don't know from a city perspective on a necessity of a laptop compared to a PC. Is there a reason why we seem to be increasing, I guess, the number of laptops usage for the city staff? Or is that, I assume that's different than the police MDTs and fire?
Actually, part of that 50 for laptops are laptops for elected officials.
Really?
So that has from time to time been in the budget, and a particular finance committee says put it in, and then it goes out of the budget because it's, no, we don't want to do that. It has gone in and out of the budget over the years. So that 50 is not totally just for employees. There are 17 PCs in there for elected officials here at the dais.
Okay. That's something I knew was discussed at one time, but didn't know we ever budgeted.
It's been discussed many times over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years.
And is it all of the cases, there's pluses and there's minuses, there's productivity opportunities, there's savings of some resources with the ability to go electronic versus hard, but City Council, it's the council's determination if that's, from a sustainability perspective, that would support the council's sustainability policy. But there's pluses and minuses with all of the programs, all the policies. But the budget provides for the opportunity to have the discussion, have the determination made. By being in here, it doesn't actually make it happen yet. So, good question.
Thank you for that. And for the record, you can save $1,000 because I don't think I need a laptop, but I would like the electronic media. There you go. The other items that I wanted to discuss, and this is just an overall comment for the overview that City Manager Borchert, you went through. The cuts and deferrals list, I do have some concern on. We already talked about the new sidewalk installation, the SSAs, because that does affect primarily the north side. The other area that primarily affects the north side is the concrete street reconstruction. And then the last item that I want to touch on a little bit of detail is what seems to be the elimination in the budget of the York and Grand intersection improvement. The reason why I bring this up, because it was voted upon and approved over 2 years ago, and then to totally see it eliminated from the capital budget shows I have great concern over. Could you touch on that a little bit?
Again, the Riverside Drive project is really not yet made the 5-year capital. It's estimated at several $1 million, has some significant potential positive economic development opportunities for that industrial neighborhood. Next bullet, the museum building, very roughly estimated, I think it was in the vicinity of $7.5 million, but with grants, with help from the foundation, it's now not in the budget. York Grand intersection, Alderman Bram is accurate, was in the budget at something greater than $200,000. There was a actual design done, I think estimated closer to $80,000, some pluses and minuses associated with that. Was not approved to go forward from a council perspective, and at this point, again, from a staff perspective, we look at the expenditure classification and the expenditure priority. It's certainly worthy, but in light of the other worthy projects, didn't make the 5-year capital. And there's others also listed as cut or deferred. You're correct.
So the only thing that I want to add is I guess we have some differences of opinion on that, is that since I did propose this item, it did go through Public Works Committee, it did go through the City Council, so it was an approved item. I have concern that now it has been, and due to the economic times, I've been asking about it in periodic instances, but it's been delayed over 2 years as well, and to see it not at all on the capital improvement budget within 5 years, I have concern over. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so everybody knows, too, we are not approving this. This is a work in progress over the next few months. We're going to be working on this, so to go through line item by line item on items tonight, I don't necessarily think that's necessary, but just so everybody, we're not approving anything tonight. This is just a preliminary first glance. So, Alderman Pezza?
Yes, thank you. In regard to the York and Grand improvement, I would like to, I guess, be cautious and kind of get information. The last plans I saw, which was probably a couple of years ago, for the O'Hare expansion, it appeared that that part of town would be affected, especially the roads and some of the access there and in that whole section of Elmhurst, Bensonville. So I think as we look to that, we should also continue to get information regarding the O'Hare expansion to see the impact that would have. I would hate for us to do any improvement and then 2-3 years from now it would get torn up again for that purpose, and it would have been a waste of money. So we should probably take that into consideration as we look into that project.
It's a very good point. Yep. And it'll be a work in progress again. O'Hare's still underway, and we're fighting for a lot of things with O'Hare. We're trying to fight for ramps at Grand Avenue off 294, so we can get a direct shot into our car dealers. This mayor, Mayor Soto from Bensonville, are both at those meetings and sitting at the table trying to get as much as we can for our community. So as we know more, we'll let you know. But I agree, to put money in that corner at this point, we definitely want to improve it. This mayor also set a wall out for the wish list that many of the aldermen have, but those things have to get voted on and passed too, so we have to keep that in mind too. We need to have the money to spend the money, Alderman, but at the same time, we also don't want to have to redo things either. So that's a good point from Alderman Pezza. Anybody else?
No, there's no sign of it being done.
Okay. This time, any other, we done with the discussion on the 5-year budget, Mr. Borchert?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. We will now go on to item number 6, which is other business. At this time, is there any other business that we'd like to discuss at the for tonight's meeting? Anybody else? Alderman Pezza, go ahead.
This may be announcements, I'm not sure. Alderman Gutenkopf and I got together, and with the new year, we tried to think of something, a way to participate in our ward to encourage and promote our businesses, which a lot of businesses are in our ward. And we thought it would be a kind of a fun and exciting idea to start a program where once a month she and I will rotate and promote a different business in our ward, different times, different dates. Mr. Quigley from the Chamber said he'd help us with the advertising of it. And the first, we're going to call it Coffee and Conversation. It will be a time for Elmhurst residents, particularly our constituents, to sit down, meet with us at their convenience. And it's a time for us to hear what they would have to say. They hear what we have to say on Monday nights. We thought it'd be a nice way to promote different businesses in our ward while getting to know the people of the town, hearing their concerns. The first one, the starter will be Wednesday, January 20th at Panera Bread from 9 until 10:30. I will be at that one. And then in February, Alderman Gutenkopf will be at Serene Teas. Not sure yet of the date and the time, but we've chosen 12 different businesses in our ward, and each month we'll be at a different one to hopefully get people to come out, sit, talk, buy some food and beverage from our local businesses, and hopefully get some awareness. Maybe they've never been there before. Maybe we'll get them in and promote some new business. So we're hoping to see a lot of people.
Very nice, very nice.
Thanks.
That's a great idea, Alderman. I know also we've been doing the ward meetings, and Alderman Gutenkopf and Alderman Pezza had a first ward meeting, which I was at as well at the library. So those are other things that we've been doing, is trying to do it by ward, so all the aldermen get to meet the constituents. At least we're trying to do those every other month. So and if we've done the second ward already with Alderman Shea and Alderman Leader, first ward, so we'll be making plans to do all the other. My goal with that was to see everybody at least once or twice during the year in each different ward. But this is very nice. So it's great that you're doing it. I don't know is there a calendar we could post this on, City Manager Borchert, so that we could.
Yes, there is on the city website a planning calendar.
Okay, we'll get that posted for you too. If you can get those dates over to our city manager, that'd be great. And
Thank you.
Aaron will get those posted on the site and everything. So, anybody else for other business? Anybody? Okay. Announcements. Any announcements? City Manager Borchert?
Just quickly, the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference, which is the DuPage County Council of Government that Elmhurst is a party of. All of the council is, again, a member of that organization. They meet monthly. One of the more interesting monthly meetings is coming up in January. It conflicts with the night at Panera, unfortunately. Wednesday, January 20th, is the legislative reception where there is an opportunity for the legislators, candidates for the legislature will come before the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference and present positions, and there's a discussion.
What date was it? Same date as January 20th?
Yeah, Wednesday, January 20th. I think in your dais distributed material tonight is a notice of that. Just routinely, if any of the council would wish to attend, let the mayor's office, manager's office know, and we will reserve that spot for you. Typically, the mayor, manager, and a department head or so attend those meetings. And certainly aldermen are invited.
Very good, very good. Also an announcement, early voting starts next Tuesday. We have a primary coming up February 2nd. I've got a lot of local candidates. We have a lot of local candidates running, which I think is great. Alderman Nybo is actually a candidate for state rep race for Representative Biggins' seat. Senator Cronin is running for county board chairman, and Jim Ryan is running for governor. So I encourage everyone to get out early. And
Brian Sheehan also, who is a resident,
that's
is
right.
also
That's
running.
Right. Absolutely. Mr. Sheehan is running as well. So a lot of activity. Please come out and vote and support Elmhurst. So any other business or any other announcements? Okay. I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. Alderman York? Alderman Wagner? All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? We're adjourned.